Okay, welcome everyone. We're going to get started. It's nice to see you. I'm Meredith Fluke, the director of the Iris and B. Gerald Cantor Gallery, and I'm so pleased to welcome everyone here to Holy Cross and to the opening of In Process Contemporary Photographers Rethinking Their Medium from the collection of Mark D. Nevins. This is our first in-person opening since the March of 2020, and yeah. Thank you. I love the cheering. We're delighted to see an amazing array of people, and it's just so great to see everyone here. So we have students, faculty, administrators, artists, welcome Ellen, members of the Worcester community. I think that we can all agree that it's wonderful to be at an in-person event together. This is an event that reminds us that the power of art brings us together, and this is an effort that we take really seriously here at the Cantor and at Holy Cross in this era of division and distrust, and especially distrust for creative endeavors. I'm extremely grateful to the administration of the college that they have championed the work of the Cantor Gallery throughout the pandemic, including this event tonight, that we're able to open our doors to the public and celebrate this important exhibition. Thanks especially go to Dean Anne-Marie Leshkovich, Provost Margaret Friege, and Holy Cross President Vincent Rougeau for their continued support for the Cantor, its programming, and for the role that it plays on campus and in the wider community. Good. I'm deeply grateful to all of those people who've worked to make this exhibition possible. Ahead of everyone else is Paula Rosenblum, Assistant Director for Communications and Operations, and Tim Johnson, our preparator, installer, lighting guru, et cetera, et cetera. As always, Paula and Tim's professionalism and expertise have been essential to the programming, mounting, promotion, and just general fact of in process. Yeah. Without them, this exhibition and its events would not exist. I'd also like to thank the Visual Arts Department, and especially Matthew Gamber, for their partnership on programming and academic engagement. And most importantly, of course, we owe a debt of gratitude to Mark Nevins, our visionary collector, whose impulse to share his collection, a manifest of his rigorous, creative, and deeply personal eye, with the Holy Cross community motivated him to pursue this project over several years, and the tenure of two different directors. What Mark knew is what we all know and now recognize, that this exhibition has the potential to be a disciplinary busting resource for courses across the college, for the Holy Cross and greater Worcester communities and beyond. Comprising work from some of the most influential and exciting artists working in the photographic medium today, In Process explores recent experimentations made by a stellar group of artists who are intervening within the photographic process to reconsider the role of light, of lens, material, and surface on the photographic object. Through their own developed processes, each crosses the permeable boundaries between media, some utilizing analog techniques and others exploiting digital technologies, so that as a group, the artists at once gaze at photography's progressive, innovative past and encourage directions for its future. In that, the exhibition is a meditation on the intersection of creativity, technology, and craft. It beautifully dovetails with the endeavors of Holy Cross, a liberal arts college, and I'm extremely excited to see the myriad ways in which these works will be encountered, studied, and discussed by the Holy Cross community. So now on to the program. Tonight we have the good fortune of hearing from Mark Nevins, who will be in conversation with his collection curator, Randy Rosen, and I have the pleasure of introducing them. A 1986 graduate of the College of the Holy Cross, it will be interesting for many people here to know that Mark was also a 1985 Fenwick Scholar, where he completed a project on the medieval epic poem Beowulf. From Holy Cross, Mark continued on to Harvard University, where he received his PhD in medieval English literature. And then, having conquered this important mountain, Mark took a turn left into the field of consulting, working for big firms, and now for the past 20 years, or maybe almost 20 years, Mark has been the head of his own firm, Nevins Consulting. In his spare time, Mark writes for the Harvard Business Review and Forbes magazine, and has also written 3 books. Is that the right number? Many books. Okay. many books, including What Happens Now, Reinvent Yourself as a Leader Before Your Business Outruns You. As a parallel endeavor, Mark has built a lifetime of collections. Many of you know that Holy Cross has been the fortunate beneficiary of his collection of graphic novels, the Mark D. Nevins 86 collection for the study of comics and graphic novels. And if you don't know it, students especially, I encourage you to spend some time with this collection on the first floor of Dinant. Mark's more recent foray into experimental photography has been approached with the same passion and intelligence with which he has approached his academic and business careers, at the heart of which lies an intense study of the human work of invention, coupled with a taste for complex, obscure, mysterious, and beautiful images that characterize this work. Mark is joined here today by Randy Rosen, curator of the Nevins Art Collection, an independent curator, author, and former adjunct professor at NYU School of Professional Studies. Randy has worked with Mark for more than a decade to assemble his collection of process-based and experimental photography, which is just one thread in Mark's larger collection. For over 25 years, Randy has been a specialist in developing art programming, with a particular focus on corporate art programs, traveling museum exhibitions, and related educational events and supportive materials. She was the founding curator for a number of major corporate art programs, including the original General Electric Collection, the Lakeview Capitol Collection, and the Alex Partners Global Art Program, for which she continues to curate and manage worldwide. Randy served on Polaroid's Cultural Task Force and on the board of Art Table, the leading national organization for professional women in the visual arts, and received their New York Chapter Leadership Award this year. Her firm, Randy Rosen Arts Associates, organized and Randy curated the landmark museum exhibition, Making Their Mark, Women Artists Move into the Mainstream, 1970 to 1985. And the catalog for that exhibition presented the first research tracking the careers of 3 generations of women artists, revealing systemic art world obstacles to their visibility. Randy's 3rd book, The Selective Eye, Seeing Beyond Beauty, is due out this year, and I want to add that Randy is the editor of the beautiful catalog for this collection, which is available in the gallery, and includes essays by Randy and Claire Raymond. So for tonight's event, I've asked Randy and Mark here to discuss Mark's collection of experimental photography, as well as larger topics of collecting. They will talk together for about a half an hour, and then we'll open the floor to questions. And I know that many of you probably will have some, because we're all fascinated with the topic of what inspires someone to collect art and how they make choices in a world saturated with art and things. So Mark, I'm going to start you off with a 2-part collection art question. Part 1, what was the first work of art that you collected? And why did you purchase it? And part 2, did you know at the time that it would become a collection, or was it just at first? Was it a first, or was it its own buy?
Good questions. The second one is a bit of a curveball.
Mm-hmm.
The first one you told me you were going to ask,
Okay.
so I've been thinking about it, although having had some time to think about it, I don't have a great answer. I have been collecting things for as long as I can remember, all kinds of things. Stamps, coins, things I found in the backyard, things I would try to drag home when my parents took me away on vacation. But the first work of art that I ever personally thought of as a unique work of art that I would possess was a drawing of a boxer that my father gave me. So I grew up in Hartford, and back when I was a kid in the 1960s and 70s, boxing was still a very big thing. And he brought home from, I'm sure, some client event, a caricature of a boxer that I just thought was beautifully drawn. It was drawn with black ink and a brush. And it sort of thrilled me, because I saw the picture published in one of the local magazines, and it thrilled me to have this object that was unique. Skipping ahead a little bit, if we want to talk about the collection that we'll be looking at later this evening, Randy will correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe the first piece of experimental photography that we added to the collection was the Matthew Brandt.
I'll let him go.
Let it go, okay. Okay, so now I'm going to come clean on something right now. So I'm a graduate of the college, as I'm sure you realize, and I'm having nightmares about this event. I don't mind talking to people, I do it all day long, I used to teach, so I've never taught a room full of bank robbers before, but I've often been in the classroom. But we all have anxiety dreams. And my anxiety dreams are all about that I have to go back to school. And it's always, I go back to my graduate program in English, and I decide it would be a good idea to take a higher level math class for some reason. And then I forget I enrolled in the class. And then I realize I did after the add drop period, and I'm screwed. So has anybody else ever had a dream like this? Is this, okay, good, all right. So it happens all the time. So the last week I've been dreaming that, sorry for the digression, that I would be up here and all of a sudden I'll get peppered with questions. Like, okay, Brian Graff in your collection, what year was he born? Like, and how exactly did Gottfried Jaeger make those pieces? So I'm going to get that off my chest, but I'm telling you this because I want you to go easy on me when it comes to the Q&A later on. So let's say it was Matthew Brandt, and you'll tell me who it was afterwards. But so Matthew Brandt is a very interesting photographer, as are all the photographers in the show. And we have been collecting works on paper for a long time. And I've always been fascinated by works on paper. I'll spare you that digression. I love paper. I love the idea of paper. Spend a lot of my time reading books which are made of paper. And so the collecting in paper was, fairly traditional. It was prints, lithographs, some drawings, a little bit of painting. And I'd always loved photography, but never thought about collecting photography. And we went to an opening in New York at the Yossi Milo Gallery, in the case of Brandt, and I was just blown away by the images. I thought they were fantastic. But in this case, and this is probably a lead into a longer conversation, I was fascinated by the process that went into making the work of art. So if you go downstairs, if you haven't been already, you'll see that there's a photograph that you'll have a hard time reading at first, and it's actually a very typical photo of a lake in Dillon, Colorado, Lake Dillon. Except you won't recognize it as a lake because this photographer takes, in this particular series, takes photos of bodies of water, principally out west, and then he soaks the photo, he prints the photo, and he soaks it in a bucket of water from the lake that was photographed. And of course, soaking the print over a period of time, whether it's a couple of days or I think in some cases a couple of months, significantly breaks down the chemistry. So when you look at it, you're going to see this highly abstract thing, but underlying it is a traditional photo. And I think that was, at least for me, one of the major steps forward to say there's something fascinating about photography in general. I did a lot of collecting of photography when I was younger, friends and my own. I took a lot of photographs, but this idea of the process that went into making something that's a photograph, but doesn't at all read as a photograph. So I think that was one of the first things that really struck me, and that ended up being a significant digression from what I would have thought would have been a fairly traditional collection of post-war and contemporary works on paper. So what was the right answer?
Well, it was a very good answer. Mark, when we first started...
What was the first piece of art we got?
I'll tell you later. When we first started, when you first start working with somebody, they come with what they're familiar with and what they know, and you've got to give people a little breathing room and a walk-around room. So we did a lot of walking around in every possible category you could think of, paintings, works on paper, etc. And slowly it evolved that Mark had two things that got his pulse going quickly. One was works on paper, very clearly, and two was anything that had to do with a process as opposed to something that was intuitive or a quick. I would look at something and say, that's a great piece intuitively, because I've looked at a lot of art, etc. And then I'd figure out what is it I know about this artist and this piece and explain to you why I thought it was a great piece. With Mark, I'd be all standing there saying, let's get this piece, and Mark would be looking and looking. So what is it about when we started? Do you remember what point at which you felt, you always said, I'm not a collector, I'm not going to collect, but at what point did you begin to feel that I want to own this? I really want to own this and live with it.
So we've had some great adventures, you and I. Randy's a magnificent friend and a tremendous mind, and I've learned a lot from her. To answer the question, I'm going to answer the question you didn't ask, and then I'll answer the question you asked first. I don't know. I've always wanted to own things. And, you know, we're sitting here at Holy Cross, which is a Jesuit Catholic school, and we're taught a lot of things, including the 7 deadly sins, 2 of which have to do with greed, avarice, you know, the desire to have things. And that's always been a little bit of a struggle for me. I take the things that I collect very seriously. I don't feel like I own them. I feel like I'm a trustee of them. But probably the first time that I really felt I wanted to own something was when I saw one of your collections, the one that you did for Alex Partners, who was a client of mine at the time. And I had seen a lot of these artists before in museums, and I liked many and recognized many of them. But it never really occurred to me, because I didn't have any friends who were art collectors, it never occurred to me that I could actually have these. And that's when I spoke to the office manager and said, who's put this incredible collection together? And they said, oh, it's Randy Rosen, of course. And then we met, and then we did spend quite a bit of time looking, because I knew I wanted to collect art seriously. I didn't know how to do it. I was very intimidated by the art world and all of the rituals and pomp and circumstance that goes on. And you were sort of a Virgil to my Dante, you know, walking me through this strange world and helping me understand it. But I think I knew I wanted to collect before I met you, and then when I met you, I said, this is the person who I think can help me do it. But the idea of collecting has been, you know,
Part of you.
yeah, I don't know why. I mean, we could do, I don't know if there's a psychology professor in the house, we could probably do a long session on why do people collect, you know, what causes you to want to collect. I don't know. For me, it probably is, so I was a frustrated artist as a kid. I went to a very small Catholic school that had no art programs. My mom would take me to the Athenaeum in Hartford. I would read. My dad would buy books about art. I would devour them. I'd read the Sunday comics. Just couldn't wait for the Sunday comics. Anything that had to do with images. And of course, when I was young, images were not all around us the way they are today. So that's a whole other topic. But just the sort of, you know, the psychology of wanting to have these things, I think, is because I decided not to go to art school. I did at Holy Cross. I took a life drawing class, and I took a printmaking class. And I found that the unlocking the mysteries of how do you make an intaglio print was fascinating, because again, it's about process. But I knew I was never going to be a significant creator of things, so I think I take a great pleasure in owning beautiful things that somebody has created. And there, I think the question of how was this made is very interesting to me. So Randy and I have gone to many galleries, many museums, many art fairs and shows, and invariably she'll introduce me to a new artist, and you know, and Jane knows this because she's seen this live. So, and actually Ellen would know this. So we're looking at works by Ellen in Jane's gallery with Randy, and I'm like, okay, I need to understand how this thing is made. And so I think Randy's like, I'll go for a coffee. I'll see you in about a half an hour, whenever you get through this. And as Jane will tell you, I'm just relentlessly attempting to understand the process of how these things are made is very interesting to me.
And we have at least 100 emails on everything, point by point, which is kind of a training for me, but is wonderful with Mark. Mark, when you go out and look, at this point we work as a team, and sometimes Mark's schedule and mine don't blend, so I'll go first, and he'll go, and we'll talk to one another and say, did you look at this? Did you not? What do you think? So it's both us going together, but always working as a team. And do you find the part of the collecting, that we've done at least, that involves the learning process?
Yeah.
Not just the process, but the learning about the artists, the meeting of the dealers, the meeting of the artists, the whole experience of opening a world that deals with imagery, that has, most of the artists we have in the collection have very strong conceptual ideas and philosophical ideas under their work. It's just not about a technique. It's about something they're trying to say about the world or the human beings, etc. And that's something that, do you find that part of it as exciting as the
Yeah.
process?
I would think that's probably the most exciting part, of which process is a component of that. So I never imagined I would work with a curator. It's been a fantastic experience. But when Randy and I first met, I think we met for a cup of coffee, but she sent me a questionnaire before we met. It's like an application process. And the questionnaire included a whole bunch of various kinds of, what are you interested in, but then the killer question was, so why do you want to collect? Now, luckily, this was a multiple choice question. And I'm reading through this, and I'm going, so because I want to, I don't know, spend a lot of money. Well, I don't have a lot of money, it's not going to be it. So I want to meet other collectors. I was like, can I not do that? I'd like to have that be not part of the reason I collect. Can I have access to, prestigious, I'm like, nope, don't want that. And it really was the questions that had to do with learning, with discovering new things, with pushing myself to see things differently. There's a great quotation. Is it Dorothea Lange, maybe? I tried to work it into the essay, but I couldn't get it in there. And it wouldn't have been appropriate anyway. But I think it's Dorothea Lange. And the quotation is, a camera is a tool to teach you how to look when you're not looking through a camera. And I think about that all the time, that you look at art and it changes. Look, what I do is very, very left-brained for a living. And there's a frustrated artist inside of me, so to be able to immerse myself into very, very left-brained approach to right-brain kinds of experiences. I can't just look at a piece of art. I have to understand how it was made. I want to know about the artist, not necessarily personally, but what's their background, who were the artists they were looking at, how does this fit into a conversation of art across the decades or across the centuries.
So much of the art world today is about marketplace and NFTs and money making, et cetera. And one of the questions on that questionnaire was, or several questions, dealt with how important the investment value of art is to you, because you have to find out when you're working with somebody if they're interested in art as a stock certificate, if they're interested in art for money purposes, which art really, as much as we talk about money and values with art, that is not what art is all about. So I was trying to get to the bottom of, do I have a collector here who is really going to be a learning person, someone who can grow? And every collector, when you start out, starts from a point of what their experience has been with the visual. And if you're doing your job, you grow the person, and then the two of you grow together. I've learned a great deal from Mark. So remember when we talked about the investment? And we periodically go back to that, because every once in a while you'll collect something and the artist becomes a hot artist. And there's a fever to that. And we try and avoid that fever most of the time. So where do you think about, where does investing or the value or the potential increment of a photograph or an artwork come in terms of collecting in your mind?
So I'm a New Englander from a very middle-class background, probably middle-class aspirationally. My father went to law school and practiced law and started his own law firm, so I've, in a weird way, followed in his footsteps, starting my own firm. But I've got very anxious spending money on things that don't seem to be essential. So, I've never bought a piece of art because I thought it would go up in value. A big part of my decision-making, and we've talked about this a lot, is the sense of, will this hold its value? So we do purchase things occasionally from up-and-coming artists or younger ones, but if you look at my collection overall, and this is a horrible, I shouldn't make this analogy, but it is like a well-balanced portfolio. I have 12-year-old twins who may come here someday, I kind of hope, and I'm going to have to pay for that. So, I'm very conscious that these pieces will, the collection overall will hold its value, at least. I would feel irresponsible if I didn't do that. That being said, I don't think about, other than can I afford it, I don't think about the value. And this is, I think, a really important point. So if there are students in the room, I didn't start collecting art until I was in my, probably late 30s, right? Maybe even early 40s.
Early 40s.
Yeah, early 40s. I would really want you to know that you don't have to have a lot of money to collect art. You shouldn't be afraid of it. You shouldn't feel like it's some sort of an elite strata of society that you're not allowed into. You should collect what you love, first of all. That's one of the best pieces of advice. If you don't love it, don't buy it. Even if it doesn't end up going up a lot in value, you'll have the pleasure of owning it, which typically, I don't know about you, but stock shares don't give me a lot of aesthetic pleasure. And start now. So, as a collector, you do become passionate or maybe even greedy about things. I would love to have second or third or fourth examples of some artists that I simply can't afford anymore. So starting earlier lets you get in on the ground level, and it may seem like a lot of money now, but you may later find that it was very timely.
And that's interesting. What do you feel about collecting a few artists that you really, really relate to, about collecting in depth rather than have one piece, to really dedicate and say, this is somebody who I want to back in a career, and different periods of the career. And occasionally, when you do that, an artist goes through a down or a flat period. Do you stay with them? What do you feel about that kind of commitment to not just the overall category, for example, of experimental photography, but several artists who you feel really have brought some very original thinking, and you want them in depth?
Yeah, so there are some artists in the show downstairs that you will see if you pay attention to the labels. There's 2 or 3, maybe in some cases more than that, works by the same artist. And I think it's very interesting to see the way that an artist challenges herself to push and to, there's I don't have the authority to speak about this, but I'll offer this. I think there must be something which I call the blue dog syndrome. So do you know this is an artist, this is named Rodrigue, and you go down to New Orleans, and all you see is the blue dogs. The blue dogs are everywhere. And this guy is making an absolute fortune painting blue dogs, because everyone wants a blue dog. And I sometimes wonder, how does an artist, I've talked to some artists about this, but I think it's a sensitive topic. How does an artist decide, this is a vein I want to continue to mine? It may or may not be an economically attractive vein, but people want more of this versus this time now to say, I've done this, and to move on. And I think with some artists you will see that they'll come back to things again and again. Jasper Johns, I saw his show a couple of weeks ago at Whitney, is a great example of that. But I think many artists will come back to things. They maybe they think differently about it and they want to go back and explore it again. So, yeah, I am a believer in collecting in depth. I like to play little parlor games with my friends and often with myself, and I think sometimes if God forbid there was a fire and I lost all of the art, would I start again in the same area, or would I collect a different kind of art? Right? I love classical photography, as you know. I love Cartier-Bresson and Irving Penn, and I would be very happy collecting. I chose not to collect that for reasons that are not entirely clear to me.
Well, how do you feel sometimes when we don't necessarily, if I'm being a little New York pushy and trying to push you in a direction that you either are not considering yet or not ready yet, sometimes the getting into the experimental photography was one of those areas.
It was,
but how do you feel when you're comfortable someplace and you're being moved or encouraged to go into territory that you don't have your grounding in yet?
Yeah, I feel comfortable. I tell my children that you don't have to like it, but you have to try it. And I think that's an important sort of mantra for life. You should try everything. You shouldn't go in with a priori ideas. If you like it, you might be surprised. I will you said you were going to embarrass me, but I'm going to embarrass you first.
Uh-oh.
So the first time that we bought a work of art was Polly Apfelbaum, who's a colorist and does these very interesting pieces with color. And I think we were sort of at the point, Mark, you got to buy something, or we're not really going to be collecting. And so we were at a fair, and Randy came up with these beautiful little woodblock prints of flowers, just gorgeous colors, but they felt, I thought of myself as a very sophisticated man. And I'm like, am I really going to buy, woodblock flowers? And
They weren't real, they were abstract.
yeah, but they're flowers. They're abstract, but they're flowers. Come see me at the gallery later on. I'll show you on my phone. You can tell me if they're flowers or not. They're abstract, fair enough. And I essentially finally just bought them so that you would stop bothering me. And I thought, okay, this isn't that much. I'll just tuck them away somewhere. And I fell in love with them. I mean, and now I'm looking back and going, God, I wish I bought like 10 of those, because they're really
And
beautiful.
they led to Olaf Nicolai.
They did, yeah, and many other
So
colorists.
that was a kind of stepping stone into a certain kind of people exploring colors. And in this exhibition, for example, with Ellen's work, I mean, she's painting color with light, nothing else but light. And those are stepping stones towards this kind of understanding, so that you're not looking at a piece and saying, I like it, I don't like it, but you're looking for what is the artist really digging here for? What is the artist really trying to say about inventiveness, about the kind of world complexity we live in, the kind of role that light plays in photography? And that's something I wanted to ask you about. There's been a shift from analog photography in many cases. The supplies are disappearing. And there's been a shift to digital. And the two get confused in many ways. People call them all photography, and they are all photography, but they're dealing with very different problems. And the art in the exhibition downstairs, many of the artists are looking at the photograph, not to photograph the reality of the world or something they see outside, which is what we think of a camera doing a photographic picture. They're looking into the material itself, and many of the photographs are objects themselves. The photograph is about the photograph and about nothing else.
Yep.
And Marco Breuer being
Sure.
the person that introduced, in terms of us, that idea originally.
Yeah. I couldn't say it better than that. I agree 100%. And I think it's fascinating when you think of photography is you're taking a picture of something, but a lot of these pictures are essentially records of their own creation, which I think is really amazing. I would also go back to, I didn't answer the other question, I think, well enough. I'm always willing to look at things, and you've been amazing at pushing me to look at things. I think pushing me to look at things that are adjacent to things that I'm interested in as a way of kind of taking up a little bit more space over here, but then pushing me into completely different areas. I've never been unhappy to try to look at things. I think you can collect in a way without purchasing anything. You can collect experiences. I know a lot of my favorite writers about photography, I'm assuming, don't have huge collections, but they've written about it vastly. I really like who's the fellow?
Rexter.
No, the other guy, the guy who writes the blog. Lauren, Daily Collector, he writes.
Oh, in the New Yorker.
No, it's in, it's a blog. Anyway, he goes to almost every single photography show in New York and all the fairs, and always writes up something about them. And, he may or may not have a big collection, I don't know, but he certainly is looking at a lot of art. And I've looked at a lot more art than I've ever bought. Could never, I don't know where I put it if I bought it all. But I think there's something about pushing yourself.
I have to interrupt.
Yeah.
You don't know where you put it, but at this point, a lot of the art is in storage.
It was, yeah.
Yeah, so what happened is Mark got involved in the collecting process and slowly but surely branched out and deeper and ended up getting more than he had walls to hang on, right?
Yes.
In other categories. The group of art that you see downstairs is one thread in the collection. There are other threads.
Certainly more than I can hang.
Yeah.
And then there's also the dimension that my wife doesn't like some of it. So some of it can't be hung. And we're still, you know, so I met my wife, for those of you who are students, I met my wife on the bridge of Carlin Hall in September of 1982. It was a long, complicated courtship, but we've known each other for a long time. We've been married for about 22 or 23 years now. And she's very tolerant of some of my eccentricities, but doesn't like all of my art. So we're kind of working our way through that. I do think it's a shame not to be able to look at it all the time, but I think there are probably worse problems to have.
Do you find that you have different favorites as you get to know the collection yourself better?
Yeah, there's nothing I've really gotten bored of. I do think it's important to move art around, because after a while you just start to not notice it as much, and I think when you move it, it's magnificent for me to see the works installed here, because I've never seen many of them hung on the wall other than when I purchased them, and certainly never seen many of them hung together, and that's just super exciting. But to go back to your point about kind of pushing into new areas, there's been lots of places. I think this was one of the questions that Meredith tossed out. So she said, are there other artists working in this area, generally speaking, experimental photography, process-based photography, that you've chosen not to collect? And there are lots of them. And there are some of them that I really like, but I wouldn't want to live with it. So there's a photographer like Liz Deschênes. We looked at her work. It's very, very, it's really powerful, but it's not something I want to be around all day long. I think it looks magnificent hanging in a gallery. I love how she thinks about art, the way she's been involved in the making of art. Is fascinating to me, but it's not something I want to live with. And I won't name other names, but there are other examples of artists. Part of it for me, and this is very subjective, but part of it for me is I'm interested in the process. So a lot of the art we've collected, other than photography, has an aspect that's conceptual to it. I love conceptual art because it's intelligent, it's often process-based, or it taps into the non-intuitive, maybe, parts of your brain. But if it doesn't have an aesthetic appeal, which can be very subjective, then I'm not interested in it.
But haven't you found that things that sometimes started out and you said, I really don't, that doesn't turn me on, it doesn't have aesthetic appeal for me. Over time, as we talked about the artist and looked at a few different shows and began to build the conceptual structure that artist is working from, that has changed.
Absolutely, no. And I mean, there's examples downstairs. So we were looking at Jessica Eaton maybe a decade ago. And there were certain bits I liked, and I loved the process. I mean, just crazy about the process. But, it didn't really resonate with me. And then over time, I came to like it more and more. And then I think that was the most recent piece we bought. And it's, it blows me away. It's stunning to me. Because I think if it's a collector, I think if you're serious about learning about something, particularly something that's creative, you get much smarter. And I think, and you said this many times, your eye becomes more sophisticated. I'm lucky that
you
get an eye, right? Yeah. And I don't think I've outgrown anything. Certainly not in this conceptual photography or process-based photography area. But I know there's things. We've gone back and looked at things in fairs that I've looked at, 15, 20 years ago, and said, "Oh, that's really nice. I don't have any interest in owning it," whereas I might have thought about purchasing it 15 years ago.
And Jessica Eaton is a very good example. If you go downstairs, she's an interesting artist, and all the color that you see in her work is done in the camera, and it's done by an additive process. And the series is called CFAAL, in a short acronym, and that's for the artists that she has had a dialogue for over a decade. Her work has had a dialogue with are Saul LeWitt and Joseph Albers. And I bring that up because we were looking at a piece recently, and Mark said, well, I think that artist is doing the same thing all the time. And to some extent, Joseph Albers, one could say, he's using the homage to the square and working out the relationship between how colors change depending on what other colors they're near. And this artist is working out her issue in experimental photography, I don't want to mention names, by repeating a certain process, but with using different chemistry for each of the images, even though the images have a relationship. So I threw that at you.
Right, yeah, yeah.
And then Mark's response to me changed after he kind of meditated on the fact,
Yeah.
well, I wouldn't call Joseph Albers,
Sure.
doing the same old thing all the time. So,
Yeah.
so that's part of that thinking and growing and having conversations process. But I ask you another question. Whenever and wherever we go, we always spend time talking to the gallery, the dealer, and part of that is the education, and part of that is also, in the art world, a lot of it is about building relationships. And how have you felt about some of those relationships that you've developed as we've gone around to the art? Everyone loves Mark. Everyone we meet loves Mark. But we get into, even at an art fair, we'll get into a 30-minute conversation. And how do you feel about that part of the experience as a collector?
Well,
Of
I think it's incredible. I feel guilty sometimes that I'm taking up these people's time. I know that it is, and you alluded to this earlier. It's a commercial enterprise, but it's also, I don't think you sell art if you don't love art. So I've always felt a little bit ambivalent about it. I don't always, and this maybe put me back on the couch again. I don't. It's not a world I feel entirely comfortable in. I always feel like a little bit like a stranger in a strange land. I think I'm still learning some of the ropes on, how do these relationships really work. But there's been a dozen or so people we've met through galleries who are just unbelievable people and really interesting. And I've had some wonderful, wonderful conversations. Learned a great deal from them. And
I'm thinking
and I
of
and I hope I
Tsugimoto
haven't.
recently.
Yeah.
The Tsugimoto.
Yeah.
We were trying to get a Tsugimoto that you saw in the exhibition, or will see in the exhibition, and to get a fresh print with a very wonderful high contrast and at a good price, because he's an expensive artist for us. And we worked with a dealer that for many years we kept going in but never could do anything with him. And then we said, we first saw the Tsugimoto we wanted, not this particular one, but another one, at his gallery, and we did not do anything at that time. And we've been trying for years to go back and do something to say thank you to him. And when this came along, Mark and I said, let's go back to, should I mention the gallery?
Sure. Yeah.
It's the Krauss Gallery, and Hans Krauss. And let's go back, because he's a personal friend of Tsugimoto, and occasionally, even though his gallery deals with earlier period art, he occasionally has Tsugimotos in the exhibition. And through Hans, we got, if you look at the image downstairs, we got an absolutely exquisite example of that particular print, that particular photograph. And we also, I think, we believe that in the art world, with the artists, with the museums, with the dealers, it's all about relationships and being fair and decent back and forth. Ellen knows that, and she, in fact, has been very generous and kind in bringing a new piece to the collection that we adore. So
I would actually answer the question differently now.
Okay.
I don't know about the art world. I don't. It's a mystery to me, but I will say that there's been a dozen or a dozen and a half gallery owners who have just been magnificent people, incredibly generous, and I've treasured the time that I've spent with them, learning from them and having them tolerate some of the many questions that I ask.
anyway, I don't know what else to ask you at this point, but Megan, I think we can throw
Meredith's
it.
going to step in, I think.
I think this would be a
Meredith.
great time to throw it to the audience. Anyone who has a question for either Randy or Mark, or both of them, you're welcome to jump in. I feel like you have covered a lot of ground, but maybe there's other questions that you have out there. Yes, Virginia.
Okay, I just have something to Mark. This is absolutely marvelous. Thank you very much. You spoke about rotating the collection and works on paper are vulnerable, right?
Yes, yeah, great point, yeah.
And that's what I wanted to sort of ask you about.
Yeah.
And just sort of imagining, when you do it, is it sometimes you do it thematically, or are you concerned about where the piece fits within the rooms that you're showing? I mean,
That's a,
we
Yeah.
Standing next to you when you're saying, okay, now I need to rotate.
So there's a huge skill in doing that I don't have. I'm the worst person to ask. Randy has helped me with some of the installation in the house. I walked into the gallery and just said, thanks to Paula and Meredith and Tim, they said, "What? This is just amazing, wow. Never imagined how you could do it, and Randy was involved in that as well." So there's definitely a skill to that. I tend to be a little bit more of the just sort of, stand it up school. I've got some shelves that I can put things on, and I'll move things around, and sometimes some of the larger ones I'll just put on a couple of little styrofoam blocks and lean them against the wall. So I guess this is sort of public knowledge. So we've lived in a townhouse in Harlem for 30 years. It's a magnificent place, but we've decided as a family that we want to spend the next decade or two not in the city anymore. My children, as I said, are 12, so we've moved up to Concord. We're going to be settling in Concord, and we'll have a lot more wall space there. It also is a house built 25, 30 years ago, so it's the kind of house that's more conducive to hanging art than an 1890 townhouse with, waist-high wainscoting everywhere and plaster and lathe walls that you can't get a nail into. So I think we'll probably have to figure that question out a little bit more. Works on paper are much more sensitive. We try to frame everything with UV glass and Optium if possible, which cuts down the glare and does a better job of protecting it, but you should obviously not have it anywhere near direct light if you can avoid it, and then move things around. One of my favorite pieces, so I play a lot of parlor games in my head, and one of my favorite, everything gets burned in a fire, that's kind of tough, so I'll move on to a happier one. If you could only keep one piece of art, what would you keep? So out of your whole collection. So it's not one of the ones in the show. It's a peculiar one. It's one my wife does not like, so that might create some problems. But it's Ellsworth Kelly's Red Square. So it's just it's a simple but deceptively, optically kind of disorienting piece of art. And just anywhere you put this square, it changes the entire room around it. However, it's a silk screen. And red, as you know, tends to be the color that goes first. So we want to be very careful where we're putting that so we don't wind up with a pink square rather than a red square at some point. But no, it's a great question, and I wish I had a better answer. It's something that maybe I'll try to learn more about. But I've got no sense of like how to match a tie to a jacket or how to pick a couch that looks good or how to hang art. I wish I did, but I'm kind of whatever the visual equivalent of being tone deaf is.
Peter.
I'm impressed that you have a PhD in medieval literature from Harvard University.
Not the only person in the room who's got a
Yes,
PhD in,
started
yeah.
off in physics in
Yeah.
Chicago,
Yeah.
which was a good start. But I'm interested in, with so much knowledge about words and
Yeah.
literature, how you think about that area as compared to understanding the visual object in front of you.
So I love to read. We've dabbled a little bit in text-based art, and there's a little bit in my collection, but I wouldn't say it's the beginning of a thread, maybe. I think I like to collect art because there's no words. And so much of my life, not just my background, but also in the course of consulting, I'm writing all day long. I'm not just writing, an occasional article for Forbes, which I don't know why I do that. There's no economic value. It's just I feel guilty that I should write once in a while. But I'm writing client reports. I'm writing emails. I'm just writing all day long. So I think to take a break from that with art, again, maybe it's just kind of different parts of my brain get hungry for different things.
I think that's great.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Sure. Thank you.
I'm just curious, was there part of the interest in photography, just, shooting old cheap cameras as a teenager?
Yeah.
Saying like, oh, look at this, it's all grainy, the sun's coming in, this, just kind of implanted something from the natural process of.
Yeah, I think probably. So I grew up in the 70s and 80s, and I did have a variety of 35 millimeter cameras. When I was in graduate school, I was doing my PhD, but I lived on campus. I lived with the undergraduates. I was a freshman proctor and house tutor, and I ultimately left an academic life because the things I really valued were teaching and advising and being part of, a dynamic community, and I felt like if I was going to go off and become a professor, I would have to spend more of my time just researching and writing for grants and that kind of thing, and I wasn't so interested in that or the politics. But I always nurtured my mentor relationships with my students who were interested in art, and a number of them took photography classes. Chris Killip was one of the visiting photographers when I was there. I think, what's his name? Greenblatt, who's the, Peter Greenaway. Peter Greenaway was visiting there. Does a lot of work with visual art. And so I played around with the medium format camera a little bit, which is really cool. So I think that having had experience working in a dark room, and sort of in a very, very simple way, I'm not in any way an accomplished photographer, understanding the chemistry and the process and how lenses work probably has something to do with my interest in this, but probably not much more than that. I think it's more about process than it is about photography per se.
We actually didn't start with photography as one
Oh,
of the
no,
threads.
not at all. No, that came along much later. It was prints that we started out with. Yeah.
Mark?
Mr. Shelton.
Yeah, so whenever you think about the fact that you see yourself as a collector and you're interested in the process by which this final product comes available, and it sounds like, and I may be completely wrong, that the vast majority of the stuff, if not all of the stuff that you have associated with this, is a final product that the artist themselves has made available because they deem it, this is exactly what I want.
Yeah.
But we know that a lot of collectors think about that whole continuum. And, just obviously myself being sort of a collector, being aware that there is the final thing that ends up on the shelf, and then there is the manuscript and the rewrites and the edits and the notes and things like that. Knowing that there's an awful lot of stuff associated with some of these artists that end up on the cutting room floor, per se.
Right.
Have you thought about or in any way considered what it might mean to ask about or inquire or take a look at some of those things that represent the continuum of the process
Yeah.
versus what you actually end up with?
Mark Fox.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. So in my collection, so first of all, I think you have to be careful. Because I think if artists don't want something to be sold, it means they're not necessarily happy with it or not ready to release it or whatever reason. So, no, I'd love to have a chance to go in and look at the studios of artists and look at things that they didn't think were worth sending to the gallery or decided that was not going to work. I think that would be, that gets kind of getting behind the curtain a little bit. I don't know how you get the backstage pass for that, but I would find it very fascinating. I think probably the closest thing to what you're describing is there is a thread in our collection, which is, I sort of started out accidentally, but I think it's now become more conscious, which is works on paper by sculptors. So Richard Serra, for example, you know him, he does the huge, what's it called, oxidized steel sculptures, they're make even you look small. And we've got a number of pieces by him on paper. Martin Puryear, who was a very important contemporary sculptor, we've got a nice etching by him. So I think that may be a little bit like that. I think it's an interesting question. Have we done anything in terms of studies for works? We have a nice Carol Dunham monoprint, and we thought
With
about
hand
maybe
painting,
getting
yeah.
a small, he's a compulsive drawer, and he did a whole bunch of drawings around the same time, just small ones, and thought about maybe getting one of those, but he's a pretty major artist, so it would have been expensive, and I just felt like that's not where you want to spend the budget this year to get a small drawing. Look, I don't have a huge budget. I mean, it's a lot bigger budget than I imagined it would be when I was a graduate student eating ramen noodles, but it's a relatively, when I walk into an art fair, no one's running over to grab me and pull me to their booth. So it's a modest budget, and I have to be very thoughtful about where I'm going to put it. And as Randy has reminded me more than once, your taste is sort of exceeding your budget at this point. So we have to be careful and figure out ways to work within that. And it's a challenge of collecting, right? You can't have everything. I tend to acquire things very slowly, typically because A, I don't want to have buyer's remorse, and I've got all this Catholic guilt that I'm dealing with, and then B, because I want to make sure I really want it, and sometimes we miss things. So there's a wonderful text-based artist named Mel Bachner, and we were looking at a piece of his at one of the art fairs, and I was sort of dragging my feet and thinking, gee, this is a little more than I want to spend right now, and let's think about it, and came back the next day, and the British Museum had grabbed it. So I got scooped by the BM, that's not bad, but that's one of those things that happens sometimes. But no, I think that would be interesting to talk about sort of more, what are the output that surrounds the production of the work of art could be something worth thinking more about.
One of the hardest things, and one of the exciting things to collect are artist sketchbooks, but to pry a sketchbook out of an artist is one of the hardest things in the world. That would be a wonderful collection to have.
And we've avoided books. So we've had a number of sort of runs at books, and Randy, I said, this is a book, you ought to get this. I'm like, I've got too many books, way too many books. I'm going to put it on a
Illustrated.
shelf, and I don't want to do that. So I've even balked a bit at portfolios. So when you go downstairs, there's a wonderful artist who takes camera obscura
Vera
photos,
Luder.
Vera Luder, and that came in a box. And I'm like, okay, so I'm going to frame these things, then what do I do with the box? Right. So I've got some things still to work through with my therapist.
I think we have time for one more question. I don't know.
Oh, and then there's the negatives from your pull.
Yeah.
That's a train wreck, I tell you.
I want to introduce you to Jerry over here, who's one of the Polaroid chemists who,
Oh, really?
Oh,
what did we raise your hand, Jerry, please?
one of the great contributions to the art world.
The Polaroid camera, the late Elsa Dorfman's cameras in my studio, and Jerry just met
Really?
in November, Thanksgiving,
Yeah.
and we were talking about the negatives,
Yeah.
and I made a special request, can we put glitter in them? That was what we were.
Oh, that's
working
great.
on that, but we did talk a lot.
Very cool.
He makes the pot, the Polaroid pots.
Right.
With chemistry in there.
Very cool. All right.
And he's come to your talk.
Good. So can I trap him?
I was
at the
going to say,
reception
can we trap
and-
you later and talk about
He's
the
gonna be like,
glitter
"Get
and
me
the,
outta
and
here. This
the
guy won't
chemistry
leave
in
me
the
alone."
pots?
Yeah. Fantastic. Great.
All right, I'm going to, Susan, I'm going to, one more question, and then please ask one more question.
Okay,
Yeah.
this is about the word collector.
Yeah.
You acknowledge that that is an ambiguous term, and some people who, outsiders, would call collectors, don't want to be called collectors. And then you ended up acknowledging that you are a collector, and I have been privileged to hang around with some major collectors, even though they don't like the term, of Southeast Asian textiles. And the way that some of them, such as the late Ann and John Summerfield, handled that question. First of all, one time I insulted them by saying
Right.
they were collectors, and they said, oh no, we're researchers.
Oh, that's good. Okay, I might steal that one. Yeah.
And they were able to combine the two and actually
Yes.
publish a lot of very important scholarship. I wonder if that's something that you yourself, going into the future, would be interested in doing, or say...
So two responses to that. Great, really quite an interesting question.
Excellent.
Thank you. So first of all, I would like to point out that I have not yet called myself a collector. My dear friend Mark just called me a collector. I did not concede that. I didn't want to correct him, but I will not. This may be semantic. I collect, but I'm not a collector. And I'm still working through that. Obviously, I am. I said to somebody once recently, I'm not a writer. I said, yeah, but you publish every month, and you've written books. I'm like, yeah, but I'm not a writer. Maybe I think I'm not good enough to be called a writer. I don't know. But I'm a little awkward with the term collector. I do collect. The other question. So I've spent a lot of my time studying, and I know what I'm good at, and I know what I'm not good at. And I wrote a little essay, not very scholarly, for the catalog, where I tried to talk a little bit about this. I do write a little bit about art. Some of it I publish, some of it I don't. But I don't know that would be something I would ever pursue in depth. Never say never. I'm pretty busy with my work right now, and I do write a little bit about literature, but we'll see. I feel like I never took an art history class, and I just feel like that would be, I'd have to do an awful lot of groundwork before I could feel comfortable that I had the authority to write about that. I do read a ton, so, you know, for every piece of art we look at, I probably read 20 or 30 hours on the artist, even if we don't end up acquiring it. Let me learn about the artist, let me find out what their story is intellectually as well as personally. But no, we'll see.
You know, I might want to just add, there's a couple of books out you might want to read about collecting or collectors in the photo world. One is before and after Maplethorpe with Sam Wagstaff, and how that whole collection started with various, the late Danny Wolf and various other people were sort of right there in the 60s and 70s, because, and then to Andy Grunberg's new book on how photography became contemporary art, you know,
Oh, right.
the revolution
Yeah.
between, you know, pop and digital, because in the 70s, 60s and 70s, I mean, there was only 2 galleries that showed photography that you could buy photography in. One was Light Gallery at 1017 Madison Avenue, who basically showed street photographers, what we call street photographers, Lee Friedlander, Dean Arbus, etc. And the other was Lee Whitkin, who basically showed Ansel Adams and Gene Cunningham, lots of books. So if you wanted to buy photography, I think there was, where did you go?
Right.
Was one question. You could buy a Cindy Sherman, she was giving them away. I mean, there was no place to really buy them. They were $40 if you wanted to buy them.
Sorry, I missed that one.
I remember telling everyone to buy photography, and they looked at me like I was cuckoo, you know, crazy person. So I think that's one of the, you know, there's being an artist and making art, and then
There's the market.
examining- Yeah, and then we have Mirrors and Windows, John Zarkowski, and, you know, that sort of dilemma where you had to bring your portfolio to the museum. Well, if you were making big pictures, and you know, this was another problem. And then the Polaroid camera came to New York, and, you know, that was in 86 or 87. So you had this sort of very intense excitement about photography. And if you wanted to study photography, well, you could go to Ansel Adams' workshop or RISD. I went to Kansas City Art Institute because they had big dark rooms. You had to keep your ear to the
Wow.
ground to find out where the action was, so to speak. And, you know, Robert, well, we had Visual Studies Workshop with, you know, the late Nathan Lyons, and he also, Joan Lyons in book art. So you had Dwayne Michaels, Les Crims, you know, you had, and then there were artists using photography, like, you know.
That was the big change when
Yeah.
when artists in the
Van
80s
Ryn,
began using
yeah,
Rauschenberg and
Polaroid,
everything,
yeah.
began using it in other other mediums. And it
Rauschenberg,
began to
maybe.
be acceptable. And it also fed in that repurposing that Rauschenberg did.
Right.
It fed into the whole art, the whole idea of what the experimental photography, which was to repurpose the traditional use of photographs into something that was uniquely different from just taking a picture of Aunt
Right.
Jenny or something.
And
So
there
that
was
was the
also
time it changed. That was
Leo Castelli.
Leo
He
Castelli.
had Castelli graphics, and it was Marvin Heiferman who had a drawer at Castelli. Well, it was you know, with the metal filing.
Right,
cabinet.
flat file.
Yeah, flat, you know, and if someone like Davis Pratt from Harvard came in, from the Fine Art Museum, he'd say, well, who should I look at? And he would pull out slides. He'd say, oh, you should look at Sandy Skoglund or Alan Carey, or I met Davis, that's how I met Davis. He started collecting photography. So it was a really, I don't know what you would call it, you know, you
It
had
was
to
an
be
it was an
interested.
underground at that point, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, we have all the, I think Richard Woodward is the one who does the collector's day.
Yeah. Maybe, I don't remember
There
the
was a
name.
woman who's been passed over a couple of times. I
Oh,
wanted to make
no,
sure she-
okay, well, okay,
Yes.
and then this is it, because we need to go see the show.
Oh.
So, you know, one more,
I just felt bad. She had a couple of times, and
Curious about the other threads of your collection, that would probably take another half an hour.
yeah. I mean, basically, I mean, what do
Well,
we got?
We
Yeah.
can talk when
Yeah.
everyone's
Yeah,
downstairs.
we'll talk.
All
I'm
right,
happy to
so-
happy to
So
show you
thank
some stuff.
Let's thank Mark and Randy for a wonderful program. I want to invite everyone to come down to the exhibition on the first floor in the Cantor Gallery. I also want to plug a few things. So this is Ellen Carey up in the front row. She, as you can tell, she's full of knowledge. Thank you, Ellen. She's one of the artists in the exhibition, and she'll be doing a program with us on April 7th. So please, that will be a virtual program, so you can join us online for that with Penelope Umbrico, one of the other artists in the show. And I just want to say one more thing for students especially. Tomorrow we'll have Abelardo Morel on campus doing a lecture at 4:30 in 519 Hogan. So I hope that you will join us for that. And actually, it doesn't have to be students. Anyone as well is able to go to that as well. So this has been a great program. We'll have more programs. We're so grateful to you for sharing all of this important information about collecting and your stories. And we will see everyone downstairs where we will continue the conversation. So thank you.
Thank you.